I am so tardy to this. I'm so tardy, but it's the spooky season. We gotta talk about something. It's the spooky season. We gotta talk about a horror movie. Okay, hello, this is Crynge from the editing booth, and I completely left out that this is going to be a spoiler review, so here's your warning. It's spoilers. Welcome to the spoiler zone. Population me. Hello, mortals. It is I, Crynge. Crynge is dead, and long live Crynge. So, a friend and I recently watched Host, a newish horror movie which started streaming on Shudder. Directed by Rob Savage, as well as written by Rob Savage, Gemma Hurley, and Jed Shepard, and not to be confused with the 2006 Korean monster film, The Host, which I really need to rewatch. Host centers around a group of friends who, due to quarantine from the, I think YouTube might get mad at me if I say the big C word, so let's just call it... Yeah, that. Anyway, they decide to get together and hold a séance via Zoom because, well, everybody's lonely and bored during quarantine. Things go awry very quickly, tensions rise to the surface, and we are treated to some good old-fashioned haunted house shenanigans. Except it's technically 6 haunted houses because this is all in a Zoom call. As I mentioned, this is currently streaming on Shudder, and for those who may not know, Shudder is basically like Netflix, but exclusively for horror movies. It's a service I've been enjoying for a couple years now, and one of the very few subscription services I bother shelling out for a full year's worth at a time. If you like horror movies, or were just wanting to get into horror but don't know where to start, I recommend Shudder. They'll have something for you. And yeah, I know, I gotta do the blah blah, this isn't sponsored thing. Though hey, Shudder, call me. Wink. But I do genuinely just love the service, and I love how frequently they have new stuff. It's great for a horror junkie like me. Now, coming back to Host, this isn't the first time we've seen this type of setup in a horror movie before. There have been things like Unfriended and Friend Request, which I think is also called Unfriended in some countries, which attempt to utilize things like video chats to try and bring a new element to the horror to arguably less than stellar effect. So many glitch filters. And other films like Hush, which use video calls as one aspect of the film, but not the main gimmick. Hush is also good, you should go watch it. But as I was saying, I watched this with a friend of mine, and I went into it expecting nothing. Like, I didn't know if I was going to get a poorly made indie cash grab that was trying to capitalize on... or if I was going to see something new and interesting. But in my heart of optimistic, black, shriveled little hearts, I was hoping Host would be a new spin on something like Paranormal Activity, which is something I also really enjoy. For the most part. And boy, was I never more happy to be right! You know, when you go into smaller budget movies like this, you never know if you're going to get something like Paranormal Activity, or, say, The Bell Witch Haunting. Seriously, if you need a good chuckle, check out Bell Witch, it's a trip. I will say, we were watching this together over voice chat, so I do think that enhanced the experience. Sitting at our computers, it definitely felt like we were in the voice call with the characters, so, I do recommend that as the premiere viewing experience. If you're a fan of found footage horror, you're gonna have a really good time. It utilizes its gimmick, i.e. the Zoom call, exceptionally well, right down to the end credits and the runtime of the film itself. And I was really impressed with some of the effects and scares. It was almost like watching a magic trick, just kind of sitting there wondering how they did that. I think the acting especially felt very naturalistic, which definitely helps sell the premise. These all felt like people you know, especially the tension between Gemma and Haley's characters. It definitely felt like people who had known each other for years, and while they liked each other, also knew each other well enough to dislike certain things about the other person. If I had to pick any cons about this movie, I would say there were a couple of scenes that had that found footage movie problem of why are you bringing your camera? But they were kept to a minimum, and if you're willing to buy into the premise, or again, you're just a fan of the subgenre, it's barely noticeable. And while I'm not sure if I'd count this as a con, I was left wondering exactly how the main character Haley knew the medium in the movie. It's never explained, and it doesn't really need to be, but the age difference and no explanation of how Haley got into the supernatural, it did stand out to me. Which does lead into something else I noticed. The main character comes across as a little reluctant to get into the seance, but also seemed to be pressuring everyone else to keep going, as though she needed the seance to happen. Before I knew what was going to happen in the movie, I almost thought that, maybe she's cursed, or was trying to pass on an evil spirit to someone else, a la The Ring. Again, super minimal nitpick. And maybe that was just a scene that had to be cut to keep the tidy runtime. I wouldn't say it actually detracts from the film at all, it's just something I noticed. If any of you have already seen the movie and noticed it too, let me know in the comments below. I'm actually curious to see if anyone had a similar experience. Overall, I would say Host's true horror lies in capturing the restless tension most of us have felt during... as well as the distress of having the inability to be there in person for those close to us when something goes wrong. Of having to weigh a very real danger of the virus to help someone in trouble. They don't talk about it explicitly, but anyone living through 2020 understands the danger and the mental arithmetic that went into Gemma's choice later in the film. You could even say, on a broader scale, the inciting incident of the seance, much like a widespread crisis such as, brings out the best and worst in people, things we may not have realized were there. Gemma is both hero and villain in that it's her meddling that sets the demon on the group, a dark reflection of what could potentially happen to your friends and loved ones if you were to perhaps ignore government ordinances regarding virus safety measures. Just as an example. Even though Gemma is also the first one willing to put herself at risk to ensure her friend is alive and well. I think this taps in, even in a small way, to many experiences people have had throughout 2020 in regards to... Suddenly you may see someone you thought was caring in a new light. And that, to me, is something only horror can do. Reflect our fears and anxieties back at us in a way that allows us to examine them and learn something about ourselves, either individually or as humanity as a whole. A perfect example being the technology and setting itself are very prescient toward current events, but in a way I don't think is going to feel dated several years from now. Instead, it acts more as a time capsule, exploring events and feelings around a specific place and time that we'll be able to look back on and examine through the lens of a spooky ghost movie. I personally think beyond just... There's something very relatable to people willing to dip into the supernatural and the occult to alleviate the feeling of stagnation, boredom, and loneliness thrust upon them due to circumstances beyond their control. Anyway, before I get any more high-minded till I loop back around and go up my own ass, check out Host. It's great. Thanks so much for watching, and if you liked this review, let me know by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and tolling the little bell. I really appreciate the support. And remember, be good to yourself, be good to each other, tell someone you appreciate them, and stay hydrated. Ave Satanas, and I'll see you later. Check out Host. Check out Host. It's in my boobs.